Just one day after my husband's funeral, I found myself seated once more in the cold, sterile boardroom of the company we had built together from scratch. My daughter in law, dressed in a tight black dress with bold red lipstick, slid a stack of paper across the table towards me. Sign here. This company belongs to someone younger, she said, her voice sharp and cold as if nails were being hammered into my husband's coffin. My son sat silently with his head bowed, his hands trembling, too afraid to speak. My grandson kept staring at his phone, ignoring everything around him. I felt as if I was losing my husband all over again. She smirked and said, "You can keep the lake house. We'll take care of the rest." My throat tightened as I remembered my husband's rough, bleeding hands when he laid the first stone of our foundation. They were accusing me of being a burden to the legacy I had helped build. A bitter laugh escaped me. I carefully placed the cedar box my husband had given me on the table. And when that lid was lifted, no one realized it held the secret that would crush their hopes and change the story of the Whitmore family forever. If you're still listening, please tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is a step forward in this journey. If this story has touched you, remember to click like so it can reach more people. I am Norma Whitmore. I am 69 years old. Until yesterday, I believed I understood what family meant. My husband Howard and I built Whitmore & Co. as one of Atlanta's largest private construction firms. We began in a small garage at the back of our house, working hard, facing debts, driven by the belief that if you create something strong enough, it will last beyond your lifetime. But today I have learned that some things are not built from concrete or steel, but from lies and greed. The boardroom before me was spacious and well lit, but as cold as an operating room. Each smooth pane of glass reflected the faces of three Whitmore generations: me, my son, and my grandson. Howard should have been here, sitting in the leather chair that now sat empty to my right. He once told me, "When I'm gone, Norma, that seat is yours." Yet here we were, just a day after his burial beneath the oak in Oakland Cemetery, and people were already gathering here, pondering how to influence the future. It felt as if they wanted to erase me from the legacy we had built. Jade, my daughter-in-law, sat upright, her eyes shining with determination, as if she was about to win a major deal. She didn't cry at the funeral, nor did she offer condolences. Throughout the service, I noticed her glancing at her watch as if she was counting down to this moment. "You know what's best for the company, don't you?" Jade said softly, her voice full of authority. "Caleb will continue where Howard left off. All you need to do is sign here." She turned the folder toward me and gently nudged it with a long finger painted a deep red. Reading the bold title about transferring executive control and ownership shares hit me like a heavy blow to the chest. Caleb, my only son, sat quietly. His shoulders slumped, and he avoided my gaze. I recognized that posture instantly, a man being guided by the woman beside him. When he was a child, Caleb had followed his father onto construction sites. Wearing a hard hat that was twice his size, he had once promised to carry on his father's work. But years of indulgence had dimmed that promise into a faint shadow. Now, standing before me, he was no longer the boy who loved building. He was a 49-year-old man afraid of his own wife. Mason, my grandson, leaned back comfortably in his chair, his expensive sneakers resting on the table leg, thumbs moving quickly over his phone. I knew he was texting friends, probably complaining about how dull this meeting was. He didn't care. He never had. Glancing at the three of them, my blood, my in-law, my heir, I felt only a cold, hollow emptiness. The day after my husband died, they were already planning how to push me aside. No tears, no respect, just calculations and power. Jade's voice flowed sweetly, but it was so cold it made the hairs on my arms stand up. "You can keep the lake house at Lake Lane Lanier," she said. That word retire made me want to laugh out loud. I wasn't their employee. I am the one who built the Whitmore name they are now living off. I remember those early days vividly. Howard would be mixing cement while I was chasing contracts, both of us with bleeding hands from carrying bricks. Some nights, we slept on the bare ground just to be ready to pour concrete at dawn. And now my daughter-in-law acts as if I should retire, like I'm some worn-out appliance to be boxed away. I took a deep breath and looked her in the eye. That's a nice speech, Jade, but you're forgetting one thing. She tilted her head, her lips curling. And what's that? She asked. I'm still alive, I replied, maintaining my calm as steel. A sudden silence filled the room. Caleb flinched. Mason finally looked up from his phone. Jade frowned briefly, but after a moment, her confidence returned. Then live well, mother, she said. This company needs fresh energy. That's what Howard would have wanted. She dared to mention my husband's name to justify her ambition. For a moment, my chest clenched as if someone had torn open the unhealed wound of the funeral. I had to tighten my fists to stop them from trembling. The room felt stifling. I could hear the clock ticking, along with the dry, cold sound of the vent. Through the glass wall, Atlanta was lively and noisy, but inside this room, time seemed to stand still. I didn't sign anything. I simply looked at them, remaining silent, letting the silence reflect their greed. We will wait for my attorney, I said quietly but firmly. Jade's eyes flickered as if she'd heard a warning, but wasn't sure if it was real. An attorney? This is a family matter. No outsiders, she replied. I gave a slight smile. Oh, I think you're the outsider here. Caleb stammered, Mom, please. We only want what's best for you. I looked at my son. Best for me or best for the name printed on that transfer? No one responded. Jade held tightly to her purse. Mason lowered his eyes. Caleb looked at the floor as if caught in a lie. I stood up and glanced at the empty leather chair to my right, where Howard usually sat. I could almost see him there, kind eyes, a calloused hand resting on a bundle of plans. He once told me that if he ever passed away, I needed to be like rebar in concrete, strong and unyielding. I took a deep breath. It was time. Today, I wasn't signing anything. I needed to review a few details first. Jade suddenly stood up. Don't you understand the situation? She said. The board will. I cut her off. There's no board above me in this company. And remember, Howard included that in the bylaws. She fell quiet. Only the vent kept hissing, like a witness with a cynical smile. I turned and walked out, carrying their anger and contempt with me. My footsteps echoed softly on the marble floor, each step feeling like a quiet farewell to a family I had lost in my heart long ago. 3 days prior, I had deliberately avoided Howard's office. I simply could not face the emptiness inside. He left the swivel chair, the engraved pen, and the coffee cup with a faint lip mark behind. But that day, something pulled me to open the door. Light filtered softly through the blinds, dust particles shining golden in the air. I moved quietly, straightening the desk and gently touching the photographs. There was Howard Young on a work assignment, focused, and beside him, a picture of me with wind tousling my hair. When I pulled out the bottom drawer, I saw a small crack in the floorboard, as if the plank had slightly shifted. I crouched down and pressed gently. The board lifted with a soft sound. Beneath it, there was a small cedar box, old but carefully polished. My hands trembled as I lifted it. The scent of aged wood mingled with Howard's usual lavender in the room, making my throat tighten. I didn't open it that day. I only knew somehow that he had left me something very important. Now, with Jade standing before me, trying to take control of the company, I placed that box on the table. No one knew what it was, but I understood. It wasn't just a memento from a husband. It was the key to revealing the truth. I gently ran my finger over the lid and offered a small, knowing smile. You want to run Whitmore & Co.? I said slowly. Then let's see what Howard left for me. The room fell into complete silence. No one responded. Only the soft click of the hinge as I lifted the lid broke the quiet, and with that sound, the door to the past began to open. I found myself seated in Howard's office, a room I hadn't dared enter since he passed away. The cedar box rested before me like a living thing, quiet and still, yet seemingly alive with something hidden inside. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting a narrow strip of golden light across the desk. I took a breath and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, I found 3 items: a gentle lock of dark brown baby hair tied with a faded pink ribbon, and a yellowed birth certificate reading Norma Whitmore Jr., and at last a sealed envelope in Howard's handwriting bearing a red wax stamp. My hands trembled as I saw the name Norma Jr. written on it, cutting into me like a knife. I had never had a daughter. Carefully, I opened the envelope. The paper inside was thick and soft, carrying a faint scent of ink, wood, and tobacco, familiar smells from the man I had shared my life with for so many years. If you're reading this letter, Norma, I am already gone. I want to leave you with a heavy truth, a burden I didn't have the courage to carry into the ground. I read each line slowly, my hands trembling as if the ground beneath me was shifting. The page described the day our baby was born. No, the day our child was born was the day I lost myself. You had passed out after a difficult labor. The doctor said you needed rest. I rushed to tell family and friends the happy news. When I returned, a young nurse stood there with red rimmed eyes. She told me our baby girl didn't survive. Those words knocked the breath out of me. I could hear my heart pounding, heavy as a hammer. Howard never told me this. I had always believed that childbirth was only a little risky, that our baby had been taken to the nursery for a few hours before returning. But the truth was, we lost our daughter on the very first day. I didn't know what to do. I felt as if I was losing my mind, punched the wall in frustration, and cried like a helpless child. Nurse Clara stayed with me throughout. She told me about a healthy newborn boy, the son of a young single mother who was planning to give him up. She said, if we took that baby, you would never have to face this loss. In my desperation, I nodded. God forgive me. I agreed. I set the letter down, tears spilling from my eyes. It was as if the paper trembled, like his hand was shaking too. I remembered the first time I held Caleb in the hospital, those dark eyes, that tiny hand gripping my finger. I loved him from that very moment. I had no idea he wasn't my flesh and blood. I loved Caleb as if he were my own. But Norma, every year that went by, this guilt consumed me from within. I tried to tell you so many times, but each time I saw you smile at him, I couldn't bring myself to do it. You were too tender, too loyal. Your love for him was genuine, and I couldn't shatter that world. But now, seeing how Jade manipulates Caleb, I realize my silence is costing us dearly. She sees no love, only control and money. She will take over this company completely. Norma, you must safeguard our legacy. I won't be here to do it for you. I leaned over the desk and tears blurred my vision as I cried. Howard, the strong and decisive man, bore this heavy sin for nearly 50 years. I wept not just for losing my husband, but also for feeling betrayed by the one I loved most. He gave me a child, yet kept a lifetime of secrets hidden. And now, when I needed him most, all I had were a few pages and a strand of hair. I sat motionless for a long time until sunset slipped past the window. The light turned a warm copper color and gently illuminated our wedding photograph on the wall. I touched Howard's face in the frame and whispered, "Did you leave me a will or a bomb?" I cried again, but the tears quickly turned into something cold, sharp, and clear, like the edge of a blade. That night, I couldn't sleep. I read the letter at least 10 times, each word embedding itself deeply within me. In one part, Howard wrote more neatly, as if he wanted to speak directly to me. If I could go back, I would still bring that baby home because without him, you would never smile again. But you need the truth. It's the only thing that can save this family. Save this family. I didn't understand what he meant until I read the last line. Find David. I trust him and trust no one else. The next morning, I called David. He has been our lawyer and friend for 30 years. He attended Caleb's wedding, spent Thanksgiving at our house, and helped Howard establish the legal foundation of the company. He answered right away, his voice warm and steady as always. Norma, I was just about to come by. Are you all right? I can't say I am. I just managed to get through. David Howard left me a letter, something secret. He was silent for a few seconds, then softly asked, should I come now? 15 minutes later, David was at my door. Now in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and eyes still sharp, he rested a hand gently but firmly on my shoulder. There's no need to say anything yet. We'll read it together. We sat at the table as the morning light slanted through the window. I handed him the letter. David read quietly for a long moment. I heard him take a deep breath. When Howard said, "The truth will save the family," David replied softly, "He wasn't wrong. But for it to do any good, you have to prove it. I looked at him, tears still in my eyes. What do you mean? I asked. He told me the letter was like a map, but each map needs a weapon to go along with it. In this case, your weapon is DNA. I froze at the thought. It scared me. You want testing? David nodded. If we can verify that Caleb is not biologically related to you and Howard, then all matters of inheritance, shares, and control will be settled. Jade will have no further cards to play. My heart started pounding faster. How could we achieve that after all these years? I noticed a slight smile, one I had seen before during tough legal battles. Hospitals often keep records and biological samples for many years. Caleb had his appendix removed when he was 8, right? I nodded. There might still be stored samples from that time. I will request permission to access them legally. For you, we will also need a DNA sample from yourself or Howard for comparison. I glanced down at the box. What about the lock of hair from the baby? David hesitated. Then his eyes lit up with hope. If that hair truly belongs to your biological child, it could be the key to everything. We will send both the baby's hair and Caleb's sample to an independent lab for analysis. His voice was calm and confident, as if reading facts about our enemies. I felt a mixture of fear and a faint glimmer of hope. And there was one more thing, David said softly, keeping his gaze steady. Howard mentioned a girl who is lost. Your biological daughter. I clenched my fist tightly. Do you think she could be found? Not an easy task, he replied. But not impossible either. I plan to hire a private investigator. We have the hospital details, the date, and the nurse's name, Clara. If she is alive, she is the key to everything. I went quiet, feeling a mixture of old pain and new hope crashing like two currents inside me. I wasn't sure whether to feel relief or fear. David stood up, took the letter, and slipped it into a file. I will handle the legal matters, he said, but Norma, you must stay calm. Tell no one, especially Caleb and Jade. If they sense any change, they might retaliate. I nodded, trying to steady my voice. I understand. For the first time in many years, I don't want to believe in family anymore. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Norma, you haven't lost your family. You're simply finding the right ones. After he left, I sat by the window. The late afternoon light spilled across our wedding picture. Howard was smiling, and beside him I was smiling too. Not realizing that the smile was built on a lie for half a century, I closed the cedar box and listened to my heartbeat blending with the wind outside. I sensed a storm approaching, but this time I would stay still and not run away. 2 days later, I drove to a job site on the south side, not to check on the progress, but simply to feel life once more. The sound of drills, the clanging of steel, and the damp smell of concrete in the morning breeze. All these sounds made me feel truly alive. For weeks after the funeral, all I had heard were cold, business-like words: sign, transfer, retire, consolidate shares. Just the language of numbers and transactions. But here, it was the real sound of work, the voices of the people who helped us raise the Whitmore empire from the ground up. I parked near the gate without announcing myself. I put on Howard's old ball cap, the one he always wore on site, and went inside. No one recognized me as the founder, and that was perfectly fine. I simply wanted to blend into the crowd, breathe in the damp air, and watch steel piles settle into the ground, like roots for a once beautiful dream. Amid the hustle and bustle, a young woman's voice rang out clear, steady, and composed. Hold on, no blame game. Let's first check the delivery slip before we file a claim. I turned to see a woman dressed in a beige safety outfit, her hard hat tilted slightly to one side, standing next to a flatbed truck loaded with steel. Nearby, large men with dusty shoulders gathered around her. They looked tense and loudly annoyed, except for her. She kept her gaze on the printed document in her hand, calm and focused. I stepped closer to listen. It turned out that a shipment of steel had arrived in the wrong gauge, enough to delay the project by at least a week. Jade would likely use this delay as an excuse to cut back on the community housing part of the project, something she's always disliked. But instead of shouting, the woman pointed gently to a number on the invoice and said, "The vendor didn't do this intentionally. We ordered the wrong code. They still have the correct gauge in the main warehouse. I'll make a call to request a priority delivery truck at their expense. In exchange, We won't classify this as a formal fault. It's a win for everyone. Everyone saves face. She finished speaking and allowed the silence to settle. The men looked at each other before nodding. No one objected. An issue that could have led to a confrontation was resolved smoothly and amicably. I watched her step aside, phone in hand, dialing the vendor. Her voice remained professional and steady, never raised even when under pressure. I couldn't look away. When she finished the call, I moved closer. "Are you Tessa Cole, right?" She turned, caught off guard, then quickly smiled. "Yes, I'm sorry." "And you are?" "I'm Norma Whitmore." Her eyes flashed with surprise, then respect. She removed her hard hat and wiped sweat from her forehead. "Mrs. Whitmore, it's an honor. I've heard so much about you and Mr. Howard. You were the reason I entered this line of work." I chuckled softly. "I thought only older people still remembered us," she said sincerely. "It is clear as daylight." "That's not true. At Georgia Tech, my professor still showed your projects." "If you want to understand what a strong foundation looks like, study them," he would say. Those words warmed my heart. It had been so long since I heard the Whitmore name spoken with respect, rather than as a prize to be won. I walked around the site with Tessa. She talked as we moved along, full of energy but never boastful. "This residential project fell behind by a couple of months, but we've managed to get about 80% of it back on track. What remains is the community housing section, which I hope we can keep." I paused. "Keep?" I remembered hearing that part was planned for removal. She responded with a small, bitter smile. "Yes, it was recommended by the new leadership. They say it isn't profitable enough, but I disagree. A construction company shouldn't only build luxurious towers for the wealthy. If workers lack a safe place to live, if those who build our structures do not have secure homes themselves, then no bridge or skyscraper truly matters." Her words made my chest tighten. Howard once told me nearly 50 years ago, "If we only build for profit, Norma, then our houses are just someone else's graves." Hearing this same truth from a woman about my granddaughter's age felt as if Howard was nearby, smiling. I watched Tessa talk with the crew. She leaned in when they spoke, never interrupted, and didn't cross her arms to seem powerful. When a worker mentioned that his child had just undergone heart surgery and he needed to leave early, she paused and gently asked, "Did the surgery go well?" He nodded, eyes filled with tears. She touched his shoulder kindly. "Good. Head home. I'll arrange for someone to cover your work." That small moment caught in my throat. For many years, I had seen young managers treat workers as mere numbers. In her, I saw what Howard called the true spirit of construction. People come first, project second. We sat on a half-finished concrete step, taking a break. She pulled a set of drawings from her pocket and unrolled them. "This is the community housing project I am advocating for," she said, her voice slow and steady. "It's expensive and the profit margins are tight, but if we complete it, over 40 families will have homes close to their workplaces. They will save time and money on their daily commute, and their children will have a safe place to play. I believe this is the most important part of the whole development." I studied the plans carefully. They showed small, neat buildings grouped together like a close-knit family. She had chosen environmentally friendly, cost-effective materials, things I supported years ago before Jade shut them down because they took too long to pay off. I asked her, "Hannah, you know Jade wants this project to be scaled back, right?" She nodded, her eyes bright but determined. "I understand, but I've submitted a detailed proposal to the leadership." I told her I don't want to see Whitmore and Co. lose everything that the name used to stand for, something bigger than just money. I couldn't say more than that. I just watched her and saw myself, the Norma in her 20s, telling Howard the same things while sitting on a pile of broken bricks and crumpled plants. When I left, the wind brought the smell of cement and dust into my coat. I thought, if Howard were alive, he would want me to trust this young woman. That evening, I opened the notebook Howard kept on his desk. On the last page, in hurried handwriting, he had written, "A company doesn't die when it runs out of money. It dies when it loses the people who still believe in what's right." I looked at that line for a long moment, then out the window, where streetlights twinkled like falling stars. Something inside me shifted. Not anger, but determination. Jade may control the board, Caleb may remain silent, but I carry Howard's legacy. I have the letter, and now I have Tessa, the girl with clear eyes and hands that touch people before they touch steel. I jotted a few words in my notebook. March 18th, I met Tessa Cole. She reminded me of who I used to be. If Whitmore has a future, it will depend on people like her. I closed the notebook, feeling a bit lighter inside. A new plan was forming in my mind, not just to save the company, but to protect its spirit. If Howard trusted me with a secret, perhaps he also left me a successor. And I understood that when the truth finally emerges, Tessa will be the most crucial piece on the board. I returned to Whitmore and corporate headquarters on Monday morning, just 4 days after my visit to the South Site. A gentle rain was falling, filling the air with the scent of wet earth and damp steel, like a day when something important is about to happen. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the tall building glowing beneath the new Whitmore sign. That name once made me proud, but now, every time I saw it, a ache spread in my chest. Today's meeting wasn't on my schedule. It was a special session called by Jade, called Equity Restructuring and Leadership Succession. I knew exactly what it really meant. A family coup. I entered the boardroom on the 19th floor. It looked the same as always, bright, cold, shiny, and heavy with the full scent of power. Jade was already sitting at the far end of the table, dressed in a perfectly fitted cream suit, her blonde hair styled high, lips painted in a bold blood red slash. Caleb sat nearby, holding a folder tightly. My son's eyes were listless, like someone who had accepted his destiny. Mason sat at the other end, tapping away on his phone and chewing gum, his headphones still on. "Let's get started," Jade said sharply and calmly. "Mrs. Norma, I hope this time there won't be any drama." I pulled out a chair and took my place in the seat that once belonged to Howard. I stared directly at her. "You should be careful using that word in someone else's house." Jade shrugged, a slight thin smile playing on her lips. "I just wanted to get this over with. The investment board has approved it. If you sign, Caleb will officially become the CEO, and you," she paused, savoring the moment, "will hold an honorary role, a symbol, with no voting rights." I leaned back, feeling calm. "No, I won't sign." The room fell silent. Caleb shifted slightly. Mason looked up and then down again. Jade smiled, a narrow, sharp curve. "You're pushing yourself out. This is a family matter, Norma." I met her gaze, my voice low enough to quiet the room. No, this was never a family matter. Just then, the wooden door behind me opened. The sound was quiet, but in that space, it sounded like a verdict. David Newen stepped inside, carrying a worn, dark brown briefcase and a blue folder, a shade Howard always liked. He nodded to me, then surveyed the room with the steady, confident look of someone who had appeared in hundreds of courtrooms and never lost. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice deep and clear. "But I believe I'm just on time." Jade frowned. "What are you doing here?" "This is a meeting for the family and the dog executive team." David gave a thin smile. "Wrong, Mrs. Whitmore. This is the official reading of Mr. Howard Whitmore's will by the lawful executor, and I am that person," I announced. The room fell silent. Caleb's eyes widened with surprise. Mason took off his headphones and finally looked up. I remained sitting, hands resting on the table, appearing calm as if I had anticipated this moment all along. Jade let out a bright, cold laugh. "You mean the old will, right? We all know what it states. That the company goes to Caleb and Mrs. Norma receives support for life. That's all." David opened the briefcase, placed a blue folder in the middle of the table. The gentle thud of the folder closing sounded neat and decisive, like the strike of a judge's gavel. "No," I said, voice even and clear. "This is the revised will, signed 6 months earlier, with proper witnesses and notarization. Mr. Howard Whitmore changed the entire arrangement of inheritance before he passed away." Jade's smile disappeared. "That can't be true." David turned to the first page and began to read, his voice steady and formal. "I, Howard Whitmore, being of sound mind and good judgment, declare this to be my final and only valid will. I leave all my assets, shares, and voting rights in Whitmore & Co. to my wife, Norma Whitmore." or to a direct blood relative if one is identified. He paused for a moment. The room was quiet, except for the soft rain tapping against the window. Jade smirked, trying to appear confident. So that means Caleb. He's the only son. You think a few vague words will scare us? David did not respond. He slowly reopened the briefcase and took out a large white envelope sealed with red wax. The overhead lights reflected off the seal like dried blood. He spoke quietly, each word lingering heavily in the air. This is the DNA analysis carried out by the state-certified independent genetics lab in Georgia. At the request of the deceased and under my direct supervision, everyone froze. I looked at Jade and saw a quick flash of panic, sharp as a knife, but I saw it clearly. She glanced sharply at Caleb, signaling, "Don't trust him." Caleb's hands trembled. "Mom, what is this?" I simply looked at him without saying a word. I wanted them to step into the trap they had set. David set his glasses aside and carefully slid a clipped stack of paper out of the envelope. The atmosphere grew heavy. Nobody moved or made a sound. The documents were a comparative analysis of Mr. Howard Whitmore's biological sample, kept in medical records at Emory Hospital, and the sample of Mr. Caleb Whitmore. David's voice lowered as he revealed the results. The chances of a biological father-son relationship were 0.0%. Jade's sharp exclamation of "No way!" echoed through the room. Caleb's face turned pale, his eyes widening as if he had been struck. Mason's phone slipped from his hand with a quiet crack. Calm and steady, David folded the report and said, "I have the certified and sealed originals. This result is official and has already been filed in a contingency court record," he continued. "Mr. Whitmore requested this truth be revealed only if absolutely necessary to protect his legacy." My lips felt dry, but I kept my composure. This was the moment I had been preparing for. Jade shouted, her voice thin and shaky, "You're making this up. You're working with her." He was behaving as if he had lost his mind. No one would believe what was happening. David reached out and touched the blue file, his expression steady and unblinking. "You can refuse to believe me, but you can't deny the facts," he said, tapping the file. "This is a will that takes effect immediately. All assets, shares, and voting rights are now owned by Mrs. Norma Whitmore, or the rightful direct heir once identified." Caleb quickly stood up, knocking his chair back with a loud clatter. "No, I am their son. I am a Whitmore." "Mom, you mustn't let them do this," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Caleb, if you were really my son, you would know that Whitmore isn't a title you can simply buy with paperwork." He paused, choking on his words, then sank back into his chair, clutching his head with both hands. Jade directed her hatred at me. "You think you've won? You have nothing but age on your side." "I'll sue you into the ground," she spat out. David offered a faint smile, the kind you give after hearing the same line 100 times. "That's your right. However, I'm afraid that at this moment, you do not have any legal claim to stay in this building. Control temporarily returns to Mrs. Norma Whitmore until the court makes a decision regarding the matter." The room grew silent, the weight of the stillness pressing down. Outside, the rain pounded harder against the windows, each drop sounding like a ticking clock. I stood quietly and collected the paper without glancing at anyone. "Do you call this a meeting?" To me, it felt more like a courtroom, and the verdict had already been delivered. I turned toward David. "Thank you. I need a few minutes alone." He nodded and signaled for me to go ahead. As I entered the hall, the light caught my hand, revealing Howard's wedding ring flashing on his finger. Behind me, I heard Jade throw down a cup. The sound was sharp and unpleasant. Caleb muttered, "No way," as if in a daze. Mason quietly slipped out, leaving behind the chaos they had created. The door shut softly behind him. Standing in the corridor, I listened to the gusts of wind within me. There was no feeling of victory, only a cold sense of relief. The storm was beginning to subside, but I sensed a still looming undercurrent ahead. I settled back into the center chair, the air dense as if a giant hand was squeezing the room tightly. Outside, the rain continued relentlessly, each heavy drop hitting the glass with a steady beat, like the pulse of a dying heart in a quiet room. David opened a second file, his voice deep and steady, clear as a church bell. The next step was to present the findings that confirmed the biological relationship between Mrs. Norma Whitmore and Mr. Caleb Whitmore. He lifted his gaze, glancing at each face as if giving one last chance for everyone to prepare for what was coming. Then he spoke, each word hitting the glass walls like a hammer. The chances that Mr. Caleb Whitmore is the biological son of Mrs. Norma Whitmore are 0%. Perhaps the hardest part is not hearing the truth, but finding ways to accept it without allowing your heart to turn cold. I chose to forgive the husband who kept a secret for a lifetime and the child whose actions deeply hurt me. What about you? If you found yourself in that room, would you stay silent, defend yourself, or choose to forgive? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your opinion. Do you believe mercy can be strong enough to keep a family united after a lie? The room was completely silent, not a single sound. The only noises were the gentle flipping of David's papers and the distant rumble of thunder outside the window. Caleb looked as if the life had been pulled out of him. He suddenly stood up, his hands trembling. No, 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 Mom. His voice cracked. Mom wouldn't do something so cruel to me. I looked at my son, or rather at the man I had believed was my son. His face was pale, his eyes filled with tears. At that moment, I didn't see a 49-year-old man. I saw the little boy I once rocked to sleep, the child I comforted when he was frightened by thunder, the one I told that kindness is stronger than power. I have always loved him. Even now, I realized that love was based on a lie. Jade broke the silence with a loud cry, shouting, "Forgery, all of it! You planned this to steal the company from us." She rushed toward David, her hand reaching out for the envelope. "Give me that. I want the certification. This isn't legal." David stayed still. Instead, he slid another letter to the middle of the table. His voice was calm, and this was Howard Whitmore's handwritten letter, signed and notarized by Fulton County. He wanted this handed to Caleb after the reading. Once more, silence settled over the room. Caleb picked up the letter slowly, his hands trembling so much that the edges of the paper shook. I saw the desk lamp catch the tears streaming down his face. He opened the letter, but I couldn't make out the words, only saw his lips move with the lines of a man who was gone. Then a tear fell and blurred the word "forgive." Caleb folded the letter and covered his face. His quiet sob sounded like wind rushing through a deep well. I said nothing. No words could comfort this deep sadness. Jade still didn't understand or refused to accept. She turned on David with a sharp tone in her voice. "I'll sue. I'll prove this is a fake. I'll call the press." David interrupted calmly, his voice low and cold. "You can do all of that, but it will only make Howard's letter public evidence of fraud, abuse of power, and misappropriation." Jade's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked around as if she were lost, then turned to Caleb for support, but Caleb's head was bowed and his fists clenched around the letter. "Trust me, Jade," he said grimly. "Dad told the truth. He never lied." She stared at him, betrayed, her eyes burning with anger. "You're as weak as your father. This whole family's insane." She grabbed her purse and abruptly stood up. "I don't need to be here another second." The door slammed behind her. Her heels echoed down the empty hall and then faded away. No one followed her. No one spoke. Mason, the grandson who had grown up in luxury, stood up, slipped his phone into his pocket. He said nothing to his father, offered no glance toward me, only the blue glow of a screen lit up his blank face. He opened the door and quietly slipped out. I watched him leave and realized that his generation remains loyal to money rather than people. The door closed behind him. Only I, David, and Caleb stayed in the room. Caleb was still there, head bowed, shoulders trembling. I didn't know what to say, Mom. I honestly didn't know. Dad never told me, I thought. I spoke softly. I understand you didn't know. But now you need to see that the truth isn't here to break you. It's here so you can choose who you want to become. Caleb lifted his eyes red-rimmed. "But who am I if I'm not your son and a father?" That question pierced my heart. From this moment, you're still Caleb, the man I raised, cared for, and loved. Blood doesn't define everything. It's your actions that do. He looked at me intently for a long moment, then quietly nodded. But in his eyes, I saw someone hollow, A man who had lost a father, a mother, and himself all in a single morning. David placed a hand gently on my shoulder as a quiet signal. I took a deep breath. "Read the humanitarian clause," I whispered. David nodded and opened the will once more. His voice was slower, softer, but every word hung heavy in the air. "I, Howard Whitmore, ask that when the truth is finally known, my wife Norma will not allow hatred to overshadow her kindness. I request that a sum equal to 10% of Whitmore and Co.'s annual net profits be set aside for a humanitarian fund. This fund will support workers, widows, and children who lose loved ones in workplace accidents. It shall be called the Norma Foundation and will be managed directly by my wife. I believe that if she remains true to who she was, kindness will be the final foundation that upholds the Whitmore name." My throat tightened as I felt Howard's presence, even after his passing, teaching me not to harden in anger. I looked at Caleb and spoke softly. "Do you hear that? Those are your father's words." He still believed in mercy. He bowed his head, tears falling onto the wood. "Dad is greater than all of us." David closed the file. "Mrs. Norma, everything is clear. Control, voting, rights, assets, they are yours." But I believe what he wanted was not a victory. It was awakening. I nodded, my voice rough. "I understand." And perhaps the cruelest part is realizing that awakening always comes too late. The room was still bright, but no longer shining. Lights streaked across the table like shadows of people leaving. I stood and picked up Howard's wedding ring from the surface, the one I had taken off before the meeting started. Now I realized he was still here. In every line, every breath, every right choice I still needed to make, Caleb stood up, voice trembling. "Mom, can you forgive me?" I placed my hand on his shoulder. "I never hated you, but you need to learn to forgive yourself first." He lowered his head, tears falling. I turned to David, my voice small but steady. "Register the humanitarian fund today." As for the company, I paused, gazing out where the rain had stopped. Evening light softened the Whitmore and Coburn sign to a golden glow, like a new promise. I knew I would find someone with enough heart to carry it forward. David nodded, a gentle look in his eyes. I thought Howard would smile. I stayed quiet. Inside, a strange calm settled, because I understood some wounds don't need bandages. They need time and mercy. The air in the boardroom after David finished reading the humanitarian clause still felt heavy, like old smoke lingering in the room. No one spoke, only the wind softly moaned against the glass, while a gray light slowly spread over Whitmore and Co. The plaque served as a cold reminder that the empire had just been shaken. David cleared his throat and opened the last part of the will. His voice was calm and gentle, but every word carried weight for Caleb Whitmore, the son I loved as if he were my own. "I leave you a basic yearly stipend to be paid only after you complete a required course of psychological therapy within 12 months and sever all legal and financial ties with Whitmore and Co. until an independent board considers you suitable for reinstatement." The room fell silent. Caleb looked up with red, tearful eyes. "My father truly wrote that." David nodded slowly, as if in agreement. "Not to punish you, but to pull you away from the woman who was dragging you down." I looked at my son, my heart heavy. Howard never lost faith in him. He only wanted him to confront himself. A man who had spent so many years under someone else's control no longer knew what his own will was. David paused for a moment before continuing. "As for Mrs. Jade Whitmore, since she has no legal claim to the estate, no blood relationship, and has committed acts of manipulation, falsification, and misuse of company assets, she is excluded from all inheritance, not entitled to severance, shares, or brand rights." Those words struck like a hammer hitting stone. Jade suddenly stood up, her face pale, then flushed with anger. "What? Not a hint?" "Say that again, David." David remained calm, slowly folding the papers, his voice lowering. "I'm reading exactly what your husband wrote. He knew you would react this way, which is why he had a copy filed with the court. You can try, Sue, but it won't change the outcome." Jade slammed her hand onto the table. The room shook slightly. "This is a trap. He's gone. How dare you say he wrote that?" Because I have witnesses, Davis said, voice still calm. Two people signed with him at the city notary, and they are still alive, one even a retired judge. A flush of color rushed across Jade's face, shock, anger, then a bitter, trembling laugh. Fine, I will sue. I'll make Norma's name public. They'll say she deceived her husband, hurt her son, and tore apart a family. I looked at her, steady. Which family, Jade? The one you bought with contracts and shares, or the one you turned into a ladder? She clenched her fists and stepped closer. Do you think you've won? You're too old. You won't defeat me. I have lawyers, the media. And David stood up, his voice cold and sharp enough to cut through the air. You may have everything you need, but at this moment, you have no legal rights in this building. He nodded toward the door. I've called security. They will escort you out of the executive floor. Jade screamed, protesting, You wouldn't! The door swung open. Two security personnel entered silently and advanced toward her. Jade struggled, her heels echoing loudly on the marble floor. The sound was sharp and cold, like the sting of a final blow from someone who had lost everything and was still fighting shadows. She spun around and shouted, Caleb, don't just stand there. Say something. You're letting them humiliate me. Caleb didn't respond. His eyes were vacant, staring through her into the emptiness. He remained silent, unflinching. Only Howard's letter in his hand was wrinkled and crushed. Jade looked around, feeling desperate, frightened, and useless. She cried once more, her voice trembling as the guards gently guided her away. Her heels gradually disappeared as the door clicked shut behind her. An oppressive silence settled over everything. I looked at Caleb. His face looked thin and hollow, as if he had aged 10 years in just an hour. Caleb, I said softly, you haven't truly lost your mother. You've only lost trust. When you're ready to find it again, I'll be here. He lifted his head, his lips trembling, but he didn't say a word. In those eyes, glazed but flickering, I saw a faint spark ignite in the darkness. Then he lowered his head, clutching Howard's letter tightly, and sank into his arms. I heard a quiet, strained cry, soft but heavy, like a confession. David stepped beside me and gently placed his hand on my shoulder. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he opened his case and took out the minutes. I'll sign, Mrs. Norma, he said softly. Today's record will be filed at the notary with witnesses and a video copy. Everything is done legally. I nodded. His pen made a steady scratch across the paper. The dry sound felt like the closing of a chapter. I looked around at the shining glass walls, the long cold table, and the leather chairs. Howard had once chosen each one. They had been symbols of success. Now they watched as a family's world fell apart. Caleb remained still. Davin moved toward him, but I shook my head. Leave him be. He needs some time. We exited the room. As the door closed behind us, I could hear only my son's ragged breathing, or perhaps the breathing of the man I once called my son. The corridor was quiet. Neon lights cast my shadow long and pale across the floor, like a faint streak. I paused in front of Howard's photograph at the end of the hall, him wearing a hard hat, smiling broadly on a construction site. I softly whispered, Fustets, you taught me that justice doesn't need to be shouted. Today I finally did it. So why does my heart still feel this heavy? David stood beside me in silence for a moment, then said, Because you're not the winner, Norma. You're the survivor. That simple truth struck me deeply. Yes, I wasn't happy. I wasn't satisfied. All I felt was compassion. Compassion for a man led astray by blind love, for a woman who sacrificed her kindness to ambition, and for myself, the one who had to watch everything fall apart just to protect what is right. After the staff finished cleaning, we returned to the boardroom. Caleb was still there, asleep over the letter. I gently draped a thin blanket over his shoulders. Then I softly spoke, knowing he couldn't hear me. Find yourself again, Caleb. When you can love without trying to control, when you can live without relying on power, that will be the moment you truly become a Whitmore. David packed the files carefully, placing everything neatly into his case. He glanced at me and gave a small smile. It's all over. I inwardly shook my head. No, David, I sense there's more. A part of the will we haven't yet seen. He paused, frowning. What do you think it might be? I looked at the cedar box on the table. The light reflected off its lid, making it glow as if it was hiding something. I spoke softly, almost like the breeze. Howard never did things halfway. If he referenced direct blood heir, it meant someone else was involved. David nodded slightly, his face thoughtful and serious. The rain had just stopped, and a late sunset poured into the room, casting a band of light across the table that seemed to divide the past from the present. I spoke softly, almost as if making a promise to myself. Tomorrow, we would open the rest of that box. The next morning, Atlanta's sky was astonishingly clear. After the rain the night before, sunlight streamed through every window at Whitmore and Co., creating warm streaks of light on the floors as if the city was waking up from a long sleep. I arrived earlier than anyone else and stepped into the old boardroom, the place that had seen the fall of lies, and maybe today something new would begin. The cedar box remained in the center of the table. The air was filled with a faint, dry scent of wood. I reached out and touched the lid, feeling my palm grow warm as if it carried the breath of someone who was no longer here. Howard used to say, every structure, whether steel or human, needs to be finished at the right time. I thought, today is that moment. David entered with a fresh stack of files and his familiar leather case. There was a different look in his eyes, no longer just my lawyer, but a man whose long journey was nearing its end. Mrs. Norma, he said slowly, today I want you to meet someone I believe Howard had in mind when he finished writing the last part of the will. I looked at him, my heart pounding a little faster. Who is it? I asked. David nodded ever so slightly. He turned toward the door and motioned. The door opened. A woman stepped in. She appeared to be about 49, slender but with a solid build. Her dark brown hair was pinned up, a few silver strands catching the light and glinting around her sun-kissed face. She wore a light gray work shirt, some cement smudges still on her sleeves, and well-worn leather shoes. But it wasn't her appearance that took me by surprise. It was her eyes, amber eyes, deep and bright, so steady I had to grip the edge of the table to keep my hands from trembling. They were Howard's eyes. David's voice broke the tense silence. Mrs. Norma, this is Ava Pierce, a civil engineer and the chief supervisor of the Northgate Bridge project. He paused. According to DNA results confirmed by an independent laboratory in Georgia, Ava Pierce is the biological daughter of you and Mr. Raisin, Howard Whitmore. The words swept through the room like a strong gust of wind. I could feel my heartbeat racing, heavy and quick, then suddenly hollow. I had to steady myself by holding onto a chair. You're saying she's your biological daughter? David nodded. The results match exactly with the DNA from the lock of hair in Mr. Howard's keepsake box. Ava stood very still, her hands clenched tightly. Her eyes moved away from David and looked directly at me. I'm sorry, she said, her voice tight and trembling. I don't know where to begin. All my life, I had believed I was adopted by a kind and loving family. They never mentioned anything about my birth parents, only that I was found at the hospital door with a birth certificate missing, the last line. I could hardly breathe. I remembered Howard's letter, the words he wrote. A young nurse switched the records. My heart ached, and yet I felt a rush of gratitude. At least the baby lived, was loved, and grew up to be good. Ava spoke softly, her voice gentle. I studied engineering, even though no one in my adoptive family worked in that field. I only knew that whenever I crossed a bridge bearing the name Whitmore, I felt something strange, as if my blood was being drawn into those steel beams. I didn't understand why. I only knew I belonged there. I couldn't focus on anything else. My eyes blurred. I moved toward her, each step passing through 49 years of regret. When I got closer, I saw the defined bridge of her nose, the firm jawline, and the slight tilt of her smile to the left. All of it was Howard. I wanted to say daughter, but my throat tightened. I could only whisper. Howard was right. He always said his blood would never fade from the structures he built, and he was right. Ava's smile was faint, tears slipping down her sun-kissed cheeks. I don't dare call you Mom, she said softly, her voice trembling. But I believe I've spent my whole life working for the people whose blood I carry. David quietly took a seat and let the moment settle. In that quiet space, time seemed to pause. It was only me and the woman with Howard's eyes, At the far end of the table, Caleb still sat. His face appeared hollow, and he looked at Ava with a mixture of shock and shame. No one spoke. Then he lowered his head. So it's you. You're the one who truly belongs to them. Ava turned slightly, her voice gentle like a breeze. I don't want to take anything from you. I just want to know where I came from and to thank my parents, the ones who raised me, even if they didn't give birth to me. Caleb remained silent. In that moment, the anger in his eyes had disappeared. Only release remained, as if the lifelong burden had finally been lifted from his shoulders. Jade stayed in the hallway, trying to push her way in and shouting something I couldn't hear. David signaled for security. They kept her back. Her heels struck the floor again, but this time it was not a threat. It was the empty sound of someone who had lost everything. The door closed behind Jade for good. Inside, the room was completely silent. No one dared to speak or move. David said, under the final clause of the will, all assets and voting rights of Whitmore and Co. belong to Mrs. Norma and the direct blood heir, Miss Ava Pierce. Miss Pierce may choose to take an executive role or delegate it. Ava looked at me, her eyes warm and steady. I don't want to take anything from you. I only want to help if you're willing. I took her hand and felt the genuine warmth of my own blood. You're not taking anything, Ava. You're restoring what the world took from us. I pulled her into an embrace. The sense of sweat, cement, and years spent on construction sites clung to her shirt, so deeply familiar that they made me cry. My tears dropped onto my daughter's shoulder, blending with hers. In that hug, I could almost hear Howard nearby, smiling softly. My final project was us, David said quietly, closing the file with a gentle tone. Whitmore and Koto had gone through 2 generations, 1 betrayal and 1 renewal. Today we saw the start of the 3rd. Ava's generation. Everyone stood still. There was no applause, no cheers. They simply bowed their heads in silence, respectful and solemn, as if at a sacred ceremony. I looked out the window. The sky was clear and bright. Sunlight reflected off the Whitmore and Commerce sign, making it shine as if washed clean after a storm. In my heart, the shadows of the past slowly faded away, opening space for something fresh yet familiar. Peace. I whispered softly, just for me. Welcome home, Ava. Welcome back, Whitmore. A week after that memorable meeting, the atmosphere inside Whitmore and Coulter remained quietly hopeful. Everything felt different. The hallways that once seemed filled with dust now shimmered with light. Staff members nodded as I passed by, not because of my title, but because they felt it too. The storm had passed and the company was beginning a new chapter. I entered the large boardroom where the board members were already seated. At the end of the table, Ava was organizing papers. She wore a white shirt, her hair pulled back. Her face still held a hint of shyness, but her eyes were steady and confident, knowing exactly where she belonged. Next to her was Tessa, the young woman I had met at the South Side. She wore simple clothes with pencil smudges and dust from the work site on her hands, but now she was bright and self-assured. David sat to my right with his sturdy briefcase neatly placed beside him. He gave me a nod that confirmed everything was ready. I stood up. The morning light streamed through the window, illuminating the Whitmore and Comis sign behind me until each letter shone brightly. Before we started, I spoke slowly and clearly. I want to remind everyone that today is not just another meeting. It's a day of passing on a legacy. The room grew silent, and all eyes were on me. I looked around at the faces and settled my gaze on Ava. Under Mr. Howard Whitmore's will, legally confirmed and filed, Miss Ava Pierce is the only direct blood heir of the Whitmore line. A gentle murmur started and then faded as I raised my hand. I spoke with confidence. Therefore, I officially declare that Ava Pierce will inherit all shares and voting rights as outlined in the will. Ava slightly bowed her head, her hand tightening around something in her grasp. I saw her eyes sparkle, though she didn't shed tears. Instead, she smiled a smile just like Howard's when he secured his first contract. I paused briefly, then spoke more slowly, almost to myself. But I want everyone here to understand this clearly. Bloodline may be the start, but true strength lies in ability that lasts. The line continued steadily, yet with enough force to leave an imprint. This company no longer exists merely to preserve the Whitmore name. It exists to remind us of Howard's lasting influence carved into the wall of our first office. Always focus on doing what is right rather than what is easy. Build what is correct, and everything else important will naturally follow. I nodded toward David. He opened his case and took out a new folder. Allow me to introduce the new leadership structure proposed by Mrs. Norma. Everyone's attention shifted to me as I spoke. Starting today, Whitmore and Coburn will operate under a three-tier model. I, Norma Whitmore, as executive chair, Ava Pierce as chief operating officer, and Tessa Cole as chief executive officer. A wave of surprise rippled through the room. It was not resistance, but curiosity, perhaps even respect, that I sensed. The reason is straightforward. Ava has technical expertise, strong roots in the industry, and is part of the Whitmore family. She understands the importance of hard work and carries the discipline of someone who has worked directly on a work site. As for Tessa, she brings youth, fresh ideas, and most importantly, the ethics that our industry is gradually losing. I looked at Tessa. She responded with a small nod, her eyes bright with determination. Ava glanced at her, and they exchanged a simple smile, something rare and filled with mutual respect. David explained the terms clearly. This arrangement is completely legal. The will gives Mrs. Norma the authority to pass on the management to the right heir. The board will now cast their votes to approve it. Hands rose one by one, no votes against. I took a deep breath. A feeling of relief, long absent, grew within me. The meeting then moved on to the part I had been eagerly waiting for. I stood up and opened the folder I had prepared after many late nights. On the cover was Whitmore Homes, a legacy being restored. I have an announcement to make, I said, my voice steady in the calm room. It's about Whitmore Homes' new project, affordable housing for workers and low-income families. A few board members murmured quietly. I smiled. This project may not bring in huge profits, but it will restore trust, and that's what construction needs most. We've already built some of the tallest buildings in this city. Now it's time to build what we can be truly proud of. Sturdy homes for the people who work hard to build them. I turned to Ava. You will be responsible for overseeing scholarships and job site safety, so no one in our team has to risk their life for a paycheck. Then I looked at Tessa, saying, you will lead design and construction. I want you to teach the entire crew the principle you share with me. Build what's right first, and the success will follow. She smiled, her eyes shining like steel in the sun. I promised Mrs. Norma, and I believe Mr. Howard would be proud. Ava nodded, her hand resting on the plan. I think he would too. He dreamed of a company that isn't just about making money, but about doing what's right. I looked at the two of them, one young, one seasoned, and felt Howard's presence between them in every breath they took. A week later, our company's journal published a special edition. The front cover featured Ava and Tessa standing beside me. The headline read, The New Era of Whitmore and Codors, Legacy Rebuilt. Beneath it was my quote, we aren't starting from zero, but from values we had forgotten. Buildings can fall, and companies can be lost, but the fundamental principles remain unbreakable. Major newspapers reported the story as well. Some called me the last woman of the honest construction generation. Others said I was the stubborn old lady who saved the company from greed. I simply smiled, needing no titles. All I wanted was for Howard to know his legacy did not end with him. One evening, when the office was quiet, I stood alone in my room. Howard's photograph caught the warm glow of the sunset. In the picture, he was smiling, simple and hopeful. I whispered softly, see, Howard. Ava came home. And Tessa, she's like I was when I was young, only a bit stronger. I paused, gazing out the window. In the distance, new activity was beginning. Cranes moved steadily. Yellow lights reflected off workers' hard hats. Steel rang against steel. It was not the cold sound of ambition, but the heartbeat of renewal. I turned back to the photo and smiled. I kept my promise, Howard, not just to protect the company, but to restore the heart we once invested in it. And you know what? I touched the glass and can see you smiling. That afternoon, the Atlanta sky looked like it was dipped in soft honey. Sunlight filtered through the old office window, casting gentle light on the faded lines of the first drawing Howard had made by hand. Ava and I sat side by side at his desk, the oak surface still scarred from the days when the company had only two employees, me and my husband. Ava traced her fingertip over the corner of the page where Howard had written in blue ink, "If you build it with love, it will last longer than steel." She smiled softly and whispered, "Now I know why he chose this work." Warmth and a touch of bitterness stirred inside me. "You know," I began, "he drew that in a rented kitchen. That night, he placed a kerosene lamp in the middle of the table, and I wrote down every measurement he read aloud. We had nothing but a dream and two calloused hands. This desk is the foundation of our entire life." Ava looked at me as if she wanted to remember every word. "And you? You never imagined you'd sit here again after everything that happened?" I let out a quiet laugh and shook my head. "No, I thought it all ended when Howard passed away, but life can be surprising, Ava. What seems lost can come back in a different form through you." She was silent, her smile flickering with uncertainty. "You know, when I was young, I didn't understand why my heart beat faster every time I saw the Whitmore logo. In high school, the teacher showed us a video about the first Whitmore Bridge. When his name appeared, I started to cry. I didn't know why, only that it felt like a memory I couldn't quite recall." I rested my hand gently on her shoulder and felt my throat tighten. "Maybe, because the soul knows where it belongs, even when the mind doesn't." We talked through the afternoon. Her story was about a childhood spent in a small house near Augusta with adoptive parents who were carpenters. They taught her to honor her promises, to face her imperfections, and to fix things with her hands. Maybe that's why she said, "I love construction. I'm not particularly good at talking, but I do know how to make my point clear." I laughed. "You're more like your father than I had thought." Then we discussed Caleb. We didn't avoid the subject, and we didn't place blame. I simply told the truth. I told her about the little boy who ran around the job sites calling Howard his hero, about the man who lost himself by marrying the wrong person and chose silence instead of facing the facts. Ava listened without judging. When I finished, she gently placed her hand over mine. "Mom, forgiveness is growing too. It's just that we don't build it by stacking bricks. We build it by stacking mercy." I raised my eyes to my daughter's amber-colored gaze, still as clear as the first moment I saw her. For the first time, someone called me Mom with a voice so peaceful, without blame, hesitation, or doubt, only love. I cried, not from pain, but from a deep sense of release. 49 years of waiting just to hear that word. A late mother, but the remedy for every wound that remained. After that day, I couldn't sleep for many nights. Not because I was haunted, but because I kept thinking about what Ava had said. Forgiveness is a process that takes time to build. I remembered Caleb's eyes at the end of the meeting, empty, yet with a faint flicker of hope. I understood that if we didn't address that pain, the weight of the past would continue to press down on all of us forever. So I decided I wanted to see Caleb, not to settle any matters of property, but to put an end to the hatred. David was opposed at first. He was worried I might get hurt again. But I simply told him, "David, there are wounds no one else can sew shut for you. You have to face them yourself if you want them to heal." The therapy center where Caleb stayed was located in the northern suburbs. I drove there on a bright spring morning with peach blossoms blooming on both sides of the road. The air was fresh and gentle. The sweet scent of the flowers and pine made me feel oddly at peace. When the nurse led me into the therapy room, I saw Caleb standing by the window, gazing out at the garden. He looked paler, thin, with gray hair just beginning to show at his temples, and his eyes were deep set. I paused there for a moment, unsure of where to start. Then he turned around, and for the first time in many years, I saw no anger in his eyes. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded calm and clear. I sat opposite him, steadying my breathing. "How are you?" I asked gently. He shrugged with a tired smile. "I'm learning how to breathe. They teach me to breathe before I talk. I used to speak just to hide, not to understand. I stayed quiet. A gentle breeze lifted the white curtain. Sunlight flickered across my hands. Caleb looked at me softly and said, I read Dad's letter every day. He wasn't angry at me. He just cared. I nodded, feeling tears gather. Your father never stopped caring for me or for you. He lowered his head, finger clasped tightly. I'm sorry, not just for the company, but for making you live through a pain I didn't understand. I reached out and took his hand. No, son, I am at fault too. I stayed silent for too long and made you believe love was something you had to beg for. He looked up at me, his eyes moist. You still call me your son after everything? I responded with a gentle smile. Blood isn't the only thing that makes someone a child, Caleb. Love also plays a part. And I have loved you for so long that it can never be lost. We sat quietly, listening only to the wind whispering through the leaves of the wan trees. That moment needed no words, no signatures, just two people who had endured too much loss sitting across from each other, breathing together. When I left the center, the sun shone bright and golden. I pulled over by the side of the road and glanced into the rearview mirror. Along the long road behind me, the trees on both sides had grown into an arch, like a bridge. A simple bridge, yet as strong and steady as the invisible thread stitching the broken parts of my family's souls back together. I softly spoke to myself, as if Howard might hear. We've built it at last, the final bridge made of forgiveness, not concrete. I then turned the car toward the Whitmore and Coleman building. In the distance, under the bright sunlight, workers were beginning to lay the first foundation for the Whitmore Homes project. The sound of hammers echoed steadily and clearly, like the pulse of life itself. A gentle feeling grew within me, soft as the breeze. An old chapter had closed, and a new beginning was taking shape. I once believed that after my encounter with Caleb and Ava's return, the worst was over. But I had forgotten one thing. People who thrive on lies never leave quietly. 2 months later, on a Monday morning, I opened a newspaper and saw my name across the front page. An old photograph of me at Howard's funeral had been placed beside a large headline, Old Whitmore Woman Strips Her Son of Inheritance. The story claimed I had fabricated a tale to seize assets. It was published on a tabloid website, but quickly spread everywhere. They wrote that I was senile, that I envied my young, beautiful daughter-in-law, and that I had created an adoption story to regain control of the company. Other news outlets added to the story. Local TV stations began calling my office, requesting exclusive interviews. I understood immediately. Jade's reputation and her money had been completely taken from her. She had used her final weapon, the dirty media. That same morning, David called me. His voice was steady, but inside you could feel the firm resolve. Mrs. Norma, don't worry. I expected she would do this. We have evidence, and this time we won't just defend ourselves. We will go on the offensive. An hour later, he arrived at my office carrying a thick file. These documents contained all the legal records of the DNA test, a certified copy of the original will, and notarized papers. I had also contacted the court to file a defamation and libel case against Jade Whitmore. I looked at him quietly and asked, Do you think the public will believe us, David? He responded with a smile. Justice doesn't always come out on TV, Norma, but it always shows up in the court file. 3 days later, David held a small press conference. No fanfare, no stage, just a plain meeting room at Whitmore and Co. In front of us sat the same reporters who had come the week before to uncover dirt, now quietly waiting. David stepped to the podium, opened the file, and spoke with calm confidence. We do not respond to rumors. We respond with facts. Here is the DNA test from the Georgia State Lab confirming that Mr. Caleb Whitmore has no biological connection to Mrs. Norma Whitmore. And here are the handwritten pages, signed and notarized, along with a video of Mr. Howard Whitmore, her husband, confirming his will 6 months before he passed away. He placed each piece of evidence on the table, one at a time, each stamped in red. No reporter dared to interrupt. Then David continued, his voice steady and unwavering. We have also filed a lawsuit against Miss U.S. Jade Whitmore for organized defamation and spreading false information aimed at damaging her reputation and hindering company operations. All the information regarding the hired media accounts and the payments for the posts has been checked thoroughly with the bank. A reporter stood quietly and asked, Miss Norma, would you like to say anything? I rose calmly and offered a simple smile. Just this: justice doesn't need to be loud, it only needs to be clear. And that is what we have achieved. Within just 2 days, the truth was out. The outlets that had spread the false stories took them down. Local television stations issued formal apologies. A leading magazine featured a story with the headline, A 69-year-old woman stands firm for justice and integrity, the real legacy of the Whitmore family. It described my journey from the wife who built a life with her husband to a mother hurt by betrayal, and finally to the protector of a legacy grown through wisdom and kindness. I read the article quietly, feeling not pride, but a sense of relief. It was as if I had restored honor, not only to myself, but also to Howard. A week later, Caleb sent me a brown envelope. Inside, there was a handwritten letter, the writing shaky but easy to read. Mom, I've read everything the paper said and I feel ashamed. Not because they spoke badly about you, but because I ever let others do it for me. I am still going to therapy. I know I don't deserve the Whitmore name, but I will try to become the man you and Dad thought I could be. I'm not just asking to come back for forgiveness. Caleb. I read each line slowly, tears blurring the ink. I didn't write back. I placed the letter in Howard's cedar box, where the pain and regret of our family would be buried once and for all. The following month, I started the Howard Foundation, a charitable organization to help young people from disadvantaged backgrounds learn construction trades and safety on job sites. During the opening, I said, Howard used to say, don't just build houses, build people. And that's what I want to continue doing in his memory. Ava took charge of the work. She visited trade schools, awarded scholarships, and organized ethics workshops. She spoke to the students with the voice of someone who had risen from humble beginnings, not from a privileged background. And Tessa, the young woman who once stood in a cloud of dust during site visits, now led 3 major Whitmore Homes projects. She worked tirelessly, holding firm to the same guiding principle: build what is right first, and the success will follow. Those words convinced me that the next Whitmore generation would not only be skilled, but also true to their values. Ava also signed a transparency charter with the board, something our company had never implemented before. From now on, every contract, expense, and bid would be visible within our organization. At the initial meeting, she said, transparency doesn't weaken us, it makes us stronger because everyone can see exactly what we're building. I listened quietly, feeling unexpectedly proud. Howard would have smiled at this, not because the company was expanding, but because the spirit he had cultivated had finally found its true advocates. And Jade, the defamation hearing concluded in just 40 minutes. The evidence against her was overwhelming. She lost the case, had to bear all legal expenses, and issued a public apology. However, the media soon lost interest. People grew tired of seeing her face. 2 weeks later, she left the city without anyone knowing where she went. Her name disappeared from the news like the fading echo of a storm, vanishing into nothing. A year later, Whitmore and Comert experienced its strongest growth in 10 years. But what brought me the greatest joy wasn't the figures on the chart. It was the look in the workers' eyes as they received the keys to their first apartments at Whitmore Homes. They took photos, smiling happily in front of a small house with a pale blue awning. On the wall, a plaque read, dedicated to Howard and Norma Whitmore, who built homes, not just buildings. I stood before it, feeling an extraordinary sense of peace. I realized that in the end, justice had come, not with a loud proclamation, but through tangible results. That evening, I returned to the office and turned on Howard's old desk lamp. Its warm glow illuminated his framed photo on the wall. I looked at that smile and softly said, see, Howard, justice never needed to make noise, only certain. Now it lives in every brick and in every person here. I closed my eyes and listened to the night wind gentling its way through the buildings we had raised. In that sound, I thought I heard Howard's voice, soft, steady, almost a whisper. You kept your promise, Norma. You rebuilt it all with justice and love. That morning, the sky over Atlanta was stunningly clear. There was not a cloud in sight, just gentle light falling over the newly completed buildings at the Whitmore home site. I stood inside the main hall of headquarters, where we held the official ceremony. I gave the signal for the transfer. No fireworks, no flashy banners, only white magnolia. Howard's flowers from our very first opening day, and rows of yellow hard hats carefully placed on a wooden desk, symbolizing the lives we had built. People stood quietly in neat rows. The atmosphere was peaceful, more a tribute to the labor and effort than to power or celebration. I stepped up to the podium, placed my hand on the microphone, and spoke calmly and clearly, not loudly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. I have lived nearly 70 years, and more than 40 of those with Howard, the man who taught me that true legacy isn't stored in a safe, but is reflected in how we treat others. I paused and looked around the room. Faces came into focus, some with gray hair, some barely out of school, yet all carrying the same pride in their eyes. We have faced many challenges. There were times I thought Whitmore and Co. might only be a memory, but today I see what we once trusted. And if Howard were here, I am sure he would tell us this. When you build with your heart, your work will endure. No one spoke, only the wind at the window, carrying the scent of wood and fresh paint, familiar aromas from our earliest days. I smiled. So today I am not passing on titles or authority. I am passing a promise that this legacy will go on through your hands, your minds, and your hearts. I stepped back and handed the microphone to Ava. She approached the front. She was dressed in a beige shirt, her hair pulled up, and she wore the old company badge of Howard that I had given her. She glanced around the hall, her voice slightly shaky, and said, "I want to read a letter, not to the board, but to all those who had helped build this with us." She unfolded a carefully folded page and began to read, voice light as a breeze. Dear aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, and everyone who has stood with Whitmore and Co., I wasn't born into this family, but today I know I am part of it. Every brick, every yard of concrete, every bridge you built bears my father Howard's name and now my mother Norma's. But I believe that name doesn't belong just to them. It belongs to all of us. Thank you for staying with us when the company faced difficulties. Thank you for believing we could rebuild. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this legacy. As she looked up, I saw many in the front rows quietly wiping away tears. Ava carefully placed the letter down, her voice calm and steady. Now I would like to pass the microphone to the person I believe will take Whitmore and Co. beyond mere fame, said Tessa Cole. Tessa stepped forward confidently, her appearance still marked by faint morning dust on her sleeves. Mrs. Norma, everyone, she began clearly and firmly. I'm not the best at giving speeches, but I do know this. We will build things that last longer than reputation. Reputation is just what people say about us. Applause echoed through the hall. I noticed David in the back, smiling and nodding. He had always believed this company would find its true purpose again, and now we could see it happening. Right after the board approved the Whitmore Charter, a document we had worked on together for weeks, containing 12 commitments to safety, dignity, and transparency in labor, I personally wrote the final line by hand. No profit is worth sacrificing a worker's health or self-respect. When that sentence was published, I knew Howard would be proud. It was the same words he had spoken when we were just two people working on a small project. A roof can only stand strong when it is built by honest hands. The ceremony was nearing its end. I stood once more with the key to the safe I had carried for 40 years. Inside, I quietly announced, with a rough voice, that it was the first bridge design Howard ever created. It crosses a small river in Tennessee. It isn't large or ornate, but it marks where everything started. I want to give it to Ava and Tessa. From now on, new bridges will be built by the next two generations. I placed the key to the tap list into Ava's hand. Just then, a beam of sunlight shone through the glass and illuminated Howard's photograph on the wall. I paused. In that light, I could almost see him at the back of the room. Warm eyes, gentle smile, hands in his pockets, nodding at me. I didn't say anything aloud. I simply nodded back as if to say, "I did it, Howard." At that moment, a staff member stepped forward and placed a bouquet of white flowers on the desk. "Mrs. Norma, these arrived this morning. There was no card, only a small note. I bent down to read it, the familiar handwriting of Caleb. Thank you for still calling me your son. I closed my fingers around the note, my eyes growing cloudy. Inside, a quiet voice whispered the truth. You never lost your mother, Caleb. Never. The ceremony concluded with a gentle wave of applause spreading through the hall. It wasn't loud or chaotic, but slow and genuine, like the steady heartbeat of people who understood they were witnessing both an end and a new beginning. I moved back to stand beside Ava and Tessa. As I looked around, I could see every face clearly in the bright daylight. Those who had experienced loss and betrayal, even those who once doubted, now stood united on the same side. Outside the large glass windows, workers in hard hats were steadily building up the fifth story of the community housing. The sounds of hammers, steel, and the breeze blended into the only soundtrack I ever truly needed. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling no more anger or fear, only a deep sense of peace, the greatest reward for a life focused on what is right. Somewhere inside, I heard a gentle voice, both distant and near at the same time. You can rest now, Norma. I smiled, my eyes still closed, letting the light pass softly through my lashes, warm and gentle as my husband's embrace. On the first morning of the next fall, Ava and I walked along the site of Whitmore and Coge's new bridge. It was a small span, just a few hundred meters long, but it meant more than anything we had ever built. This bridge would connect a struggling neighborhood in the south of the city to the downtown area, the place where people still say the American dream begins. The early wind swept through, carrying the scent of fresh steel, wood, and damp earth, still holding moisture. I closed my eyes and took in that familiar aroma of what truly endures, not because of wealth, but because of hard work, faith, and patience. Ava walked beside me, holding a rolled plan in her hand, her hair softly stirred by the breeze. She paused and looked out at the crews setting the first girders into place, then softly asked, Ma'am, what do you think is the strongest structure? I smiled as I watched her hands move gently under the sunlight. The human heart, honey. No material lasts as long as trust and love. Steel can rust, concrete can crack, but if the heart is built properly, it will endure 100 years. Ava nodded with a smile. In the gentle morning light, she looked more like Howard than ever. Not just in her face, but in her eyes. Eyes of someone who believes that everything can be rebuilt. Even after everything collapsed, I lifted my gaze toward the memorial plaque by the riverbank, where Howard's image was engraved. Darling, I thought quietly to myself, I have forgiven you, not because you were right, but because I realized that love sometimes makes us choose the wrong ways to protect what is truly worth saving. You brought me a child, not born of my blood, but born of my heart. That child, along with the daughter we lost, completed your legacy. I forgave Caleb too, not with words, but through my actions. By keeping his name in the family record, by placing his letter in the cedar box beside Howard's, because I understand that mistakes are part of growing up, and sometimes the price of learning mercy is tears. On the site, Tessa examined the steel frame with the chief engineer. She stood tall, the sunlight shining on her sun-kissed face, her eyes shining with conviction. Ava moved over to sign the 10-year plan for community infrastructure, a plan created together by 2 generations. I stood behind them, feeling lighter than air. Howard had dreamed of this day, when real people would continue building real things, not for fame or power, but out of pride in creating something valuable for others. I took out my notebook and wrote the final entry. My hand was unsteady, but my heart was steady. Tomorrow, we will lay the foundation of the smallest bridge, a symbol connecting generations. On one side lies a peaceful past, and on the other, a future built solidly on trust. Ava turned around and smiled. Mom, I believe Howard is smiling too. I looked at her, then at our reflections in the glass of the side trailer, one tall, one shorter, merging like two halves of the same soul. The autumn breeze carried the sound of steel clinking and the steady rhythm of hammers, as constant as a heartbeat. Perhaps that is the sound of life continuing, the music of what lasts, even when we are no longer present to witness it. That afternoon, I sat in my small office, Gazing out over the site, the sunset cast a warm bronze glow over everything. I picked up the old journal, whose first page was written in 1981, when the company had just 4 people in a dream. Today, I added one more line to the last page. Howard, I have preserved our legacy. Not the buildings themselves, but the people who can stand strong through any storm. And if someone were to ask me what the greatest gift a life can give is, I would say it's the trust passed from one person to another. I closed the journal, feeling at peace inside. Outside, the wind carried the sounds of workers' laughter and the crackle of welding, blending into a familiar, comforting melody. It was the song of a life, of fairness, and of kindness that has been carried forward through generations. Night settled in. I stepped onto the balcony and looked down to the site. The yellow light spread out, reflected in the river below the bridge, shimmering like 1,000 stars. I quietly whispered to myself and to anyone who might have ever listened to my story. In the end, life is not measured by what we own, but by what we leave behind for others. At that moment, I understood my legacy would not only be within Whitmore and Co., but also in every heart that believes doing what is right is always worth the effort, even if you have to restart from the ruins. If you have stayed with me until the end, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am a woman who lost a husband, a child, and her good name, then found herself among the ruins. I am not special. I am simply someone who believes that doing what is right never goes out of fashion, and that mercy still has a place even in the coldest places. What about you? When you think about your life, what does leaving a legacy mean to you? Is it blood ties, wealth, or what you leave behind for others? The hands you've held, the people you've helped? Stand tall again after a storm? I genuinely want to hear your story. Share it in the comments because sometimes one honest story can bring warmth to someone who feels lost. And if you believe, as I do, that justice and kindness still exist, please like and subscribe and stay with me as we continue sharing stories of trust, love, and homes that can weather every gale.